The fall of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, a giant that dominated the global political scene for over 7 decades, became one of the most significant socialist experiments in modern history. From its rise to its eventual collapse, the USSR shaped international politics, the global economy, and even popular culture. But what really happened for such a powerful entity to collapse? Today, we will explore its origin, how its internal structure operated, and the events that led to its definitive fall in 1991, the emergence of the Soviet Union. To understand the collapse of the Soviet Union, we need to go back to its beginnings in 1917. The Russian Empire was on the verge of collapse. World War I had devastated the country. Soldiers, poorly equipped and unmotivated, were sent to fight a war that the people did not support. Internally, the situation was even worse. Hunger, rampant inflation, and a lack of political reforms were undermining the authority of Tsar Nicholas II. Popular dissatisfaction led to the February Revolution of 1917, which overthrew the Tsar and established a provisional government. However, the provisional government was unable to solve the country's problems, especially regarding Russia's involvement in the war. In this chaotic context, the Bolshevik Party, led by Vladimir Lenin, gained strength. Through the October Revolution, the Bolsheviks seized power, promising peace, land, and bread to the Russian people. Amidst the ensuing civil war, Lenin's Red Army defeated the White Army, formed by counter-revolutionary forces. In 1922, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, was officially founded, initially comprising Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and Transcaucasia. Marxist-Leninist ideology permeated all Soviet institutions with the promise of building a classless, egalitarian society. The Stalinist era. After Lenin's death in 1924, Joseph Stalin took control of the Communist Party. Stalin radically transformed the Soviet Union into a totalitarian state. His policy of forced industrialization and the collectivization of agriculture marked a period of significant development, but also of extreme repression. Collectivization, for instance, came at a high human cost. In the countryside, millions of peasants, known as kulaks, were arrested, deported, or executed, and agricultural production plummeted. This led to one of the greatest tragedies of the Stalinist period, the Holodomor, an artificial famine in Ukraine that killed millions. Stalin also led the Great Purges, a political repression campaign aimed at eliminating any opposition to his rule. Thousands of Communist Party members, military officers, intellectuals, and ordinary citizens were executed or sent to gulags, forced labor camps in inhumane conditions. Fear and repression were constant in Soviet citizens' lives. Despite these horrors, Stalin consolidated the power of the Soviet Union, making it a military powerhouse. His leadership was crucial in defeating Nazi Germany during World War II, especially after the Battle of Stalingrad. In the post-war period, the USSR emerged as a global superpower. The Cold War and competition with the West. With the end of World War II, the Soviet Union rapidly expanded its influence over Eastern Europe, creating a bloc of satellite countries under communist rule. The Cold War began, and the world was polarized between the socialist and capitalist blocs. During this period, significant events shaped international politics. In 1949, the USSR detonated its first atomic bomb, starting an arms race with the United States. In 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. The tension between the two superpowers was palpable. Additionally, the space race became a symbol of technological competition between the two blocs. In 1957, the USSR launched the first satellite, Sputnik, and in 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space, consolidating Soviet supremacy in space exploration. However, internally, the Soviet economy faced growing problems. The centrally planned, highly bureaucratic economic model could not keep up with the growth and innovation of Western market economies. Reforms introduced by leaders like Nikita Khrushchev and Leonid Brezhnev were insufficient to resolve these structural issues. Gorbachev's reforms and the final crisis. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev took power and inherited a country in crisis. Recognizing the need for deep changes, he implemented two fundamental policies: Perestroika, economic restructuring, and Glasnost, political openness. These reforms aimed to modernize the Soviet economy and create greater openness in society. Perestroika sought to introduce market elements into the planned economy. Small private businesses were allowed, and collective farms began to be restructured. However, the economy was already in such a precarious state that these reforms came too late to save the system. Centralized control and endemic corruption hindered the implementation of these changes. Glasnost, on the other hand, brought greater freedom of expression and political transparency. For the first time in decades, Soviet citizens could openly criticize the government and expose past horrors, such as the crimes of the Stalinist era. This openness, however, also unleashed strong nationalism in Soviet republics, like Ukraine and the Baltic states, which began to demand independence. As Gorbachev struggled to maintain the cohesion of the USSR, pro-independence movements gained momentum. In 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall was the first major sign of the impending collapse. Soviet control over Eastern Europe was crumbling, and the communist bloc was collapsing. The dissolution of the Soviet Union. In 1991, tensions reached their peak. Several republics such as Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania declared independence. In August of that year, a coup attempt by conservatives within the Communist Party failed, further weakening the central government. Finally, in December 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev resigned as president of the USSR. A few days later, the Soviet Union was officially dissolved, and 15 new countries emerged on the international scene. Russia, under the leadership of Boris Yeltsin, took the USSR's place as a global power, but the country plunged into a deep economic crisis in the following years. Consequences of the collapse. The fall of the Soviet Union marked the end of an era. The balance of global power changed drastically, and communism lost strength as a dominant political system. For many, the end of the USSR meant freedom and a chance to rebuild their nations. However, for others, especially in Russia, the collapse brought economic chaos, political instability, and the end of a national identity built over decades. The transition to market economies was challenging, with uncontrolled privatizations and the rise of oligarchs who dominated key sectors of the economy. In the 1990s, Russia faced hyperinflation, mass poverty, and a sharp decline in quality of life. The fall of the Soviet Union was the result of decades of economic, political, and social problems, culminating in an inevitable collapse. The socialist experiment that began with great hope in 1917 ended in 1991 with the dissolution of one of the greatest empires of the 20th century. Today, the lessons of this fall still resonate, both in Russia and in the rest of the world, influencing global policies and how nations handle their own internal crises.